slowed and were suspended in 1941. The war again. To the post-war exploration. After 1945, Shell-Darcy partnership resumed work with renewed determination. Camps were built at Owerri and Okigwe. Seismic surveys were conducted across the Niger Delta. Helicopters were used for aerial surveys, a sign of how advanced operations had become compared to earlier decades. We could see the metamorphosis, so to say. The colonial government supported the venture, granting favorable leases and low royalties. Nationalist resistance. But these years were also marked by growing Nigerian nationalism. In 1945, the Mineral Ordinance reaffirmed that all minerals belonged to the crown. This angered many Nigerians who saw it as theft of the national resources. People like Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, leader of the NCNC, denounced Shell-Darcy's monopoly. His newspaper, the West African Pilot, ran articles criticizing the exclusion of Nigerians from oil exploration. Villagers resisted exploration teams at Ikeduru and Orodo in 1948 to 49. Protests erupted and police had to be deployed. Communities felt marginalized with no share in royalties or decision-making. Yet, by 1949, a paradox emerged. Nationalist leaders themselves began to accept that oil would be vital for Nigeria's economic independence. Oil was reframed as a national priority, even as communities continued to resist. Sounds like we're living in it now. So from the very beginning, oil in Nigeria was contested, a source of both hope and resentment. So we now move in 1951, the Shell-Darcy Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria was formally incorporated. The company expanded rapidly. By 1954, it employed over 2,000 workers. But of these, only 3 Nigerians held senior technical positions. Nigerianization was slow and symbolic. This imbalance would later fuel discontent in the post-colonial era. The breakthrough. From 1951 to 1955, Shell-Darcy drilled numerous wells at Ihua, Akata, Umuahia, and elsewhere. Almost all were dry or uneconomic. Millions of pounds were spent. Then, in January of 1956, the breakthrough came at Oloibri in the Niger Delta. After drilling to a depth of 12,008 feet, Shell struck oil of commercial quality. This was Nigeria's first true oil discovery. Excitement spread quickly. Soon more fields were discovered at Afam and Bomu. Pipelines were laid to Port Harcourt, where export facilities were built. First exports, 1958. March of 1958, Nigeria exported its first crude oil. The shipment consisted of 8,500 tons. The destination was Rotterdam. The producer was Shell-Darcy. After more than 50 years of searching, Nigeria had become an oil exporting country. We now have a place on the big table. Here, from 1903 to 1958, over half a century, dozens of wells were drilled, millions of pounds spent, laws passed, protests raised, companies abandoned, new ventures started, and finally, the oil flowed. Closing reflections. The colonial phase of Nigeria's oil story reveals three key patterns. One, foreign control. From the beginning, oil was explored and developed by foreign companies, protected by the colonial laws. Nigerians had little say. Two, strategic importance. Oil exploration was always tied to Britain's global concerns, the Navy, industrial growth, and competition with other powers. Nationalist response. That's three. Nigerians protested laws that stripped them of ownership, resisted companies on their land, and demanded a share of the wealth. That they also recognized oil's potential for the future. By 1958, oil was flowing from Oloibri to Rotterdam. Independence was just 2 years away. Nigeria would enter the independence as an oil-producing nation. And the foundations of the industry, foreign dominance, exclusion of local communities, and the framing of oil as a national but not local resource would shape its future for better and for worse. For better and for worse. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of oil exploration in colonial Nigeria. I call on my colleague, Edith Young. Take it away.
Sure. Isn't that just interesting?
Before you go on, Ms. Didi, I'd like to implore everyone who have comments and questions to use the chat box so that we can take that right after this session. Go on, Ms. Didi.
All right, thank you. So, I mean, it's interesting, and I really like how the narrative draws us into those three key patterns that have, that established the original phasing of how oil came to be in Nigeria and the exploration of it, right? But when I look into part three, we herald the arrival of the giants, Shell, Darcy, right? And the story of their breakthrough is the climax of this entire colonial search. But there's a fascinating bit of corporate and political maneuvering right from the beginning of their partnership. And you mentioned how they formed the joint venture, but it doesn't mention entirely a likely reason why, right? So, Shell, right? It's Dutch controlled because I think they held about 60% at the time and the British held only 40%. And the 1907 ordinance we talked about with this strict British control company course was still on the books. So Shell on its own would have been barred from getting an exploration license. So the partnership with British Darcy was almost certainly a strategic move to get around the colonial law. It was a marriage of convenience, not pure love, that gave them access to the entire territory of Nigeria. Now, when we jump ahead to the post-World War II era, you're capturing the rising tide of nationalism. And we now understand the depth. To understand the depth of local anger, you have to look at the law. And the Mineral Oils Ordinance essentially gave exploration parties the right to enter any land they wanted. They didn't need permission from landowners or communities. The only legal requirement was that the company had to pay compensation at rates set by the colonial district officer for any economic trees or crops that were destroyed. So you can just imagine a company just showing up on your farmland, clearing a 6-foot wide strip for miles to conduct seismic surveys, puts pipelines, and you really had no legal power to stop them, to contest it. And this is the context for the protests at Ikeduru and Orodo that we talked about. The most pivotal and perhaps most tragic moment of this era is a political battle that happened in 1949. And this was even before oil was found, where the governor at the time, Sir John Macpherson, was a very forward-thinking man. So when Shell Darcy was applying for a new prospecting license, he saw a chance to secure a better deal for Nigeria's future. So he made 4 radical demands. He asked that the company be formed locally in Nigeria, that the Nigerian government gets a direct share in the company's profits beyond just standard royalties, which was what was happening initially. The government would have the right to appoint a director to the company's board, and that the Nigerian public be given the chance to buy shares in the company. Interesting, isn't it? Isn't that what we're doing today, isn't it? But at the time, it was an incredible vision for partnership, but Shell Darcy flatly refused, and I can imagine why. As a business person, I probably would do exactly the same thing. They were terrified that agreeing to this would create an undesirable precedent for their negotiations in other parts of the world. And here's the twist. Macpherson's own executive council, which included Nigerian nationalist leaders, voted against him. And they sided with Shell Darcy. They argued that it was a vital interest to Nigeria that the search for oil continued without delay. And in the moment, the idea of oil as a national prize to be secured at all costs overrode the local concerns and the chance for a more equitable partnership. And that decision would echo for the next 70 years. So finally, as we close the whole colonial chapter, there was one last global event to mention, and that was the discovery at Oloibiri in 1956, which was perfectly timed. That same year, the Suez Crisis threw global oil shipping into chaos. Suddenly, a source of oil that was on what the industry called the right side of the Suez Canal became immensely attractive. And that begins our story, right? That crisis is what truly put us on the map for all the majors like Mobil, Gulf, Eni, ensuring that by the time independence came, the scramble for Nigeria's oil was already well underway. So thank you. And I'll hand back to Isobe at this point.
Thank you, Gideon.
You're welcome.
Rightly put, like we're living in those decisions more or less. You know, I would say they didn't see far enough, and those decisions are now playing out, and we are in the mix of everything. But the future is still ahead of us. I hand over to our coordinator. I think she made mention of questions. If you have any questions from the house, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Makri and Mr. Didon. You did justice to that, and I'm excited that I'm here and hearing all of these backstories. You know, when Mr. Makri was starting, he said, you know, history tends to repeat itself. You know, from everything, the back, you can see the pattern that it's almost like the same kind of things still come back to happen again. And I also find it fascinating that it was small, older companies that believed in oil exploration in Nigeria at the beginning. And it was all of the effort that they put in that the bigger companies
came to ride on.
Yes, and they rode on that to, you know, begin oil exploration on a larger scale. And it's also surprising that the Britons that wanted the oil for their economy to also support the Navy at the time did not commit enough financially, or they didn't believe enough in committing so much in comparison to what they committed in other places to Nigeria. But thank God for bringing Nigeria this far. The story is much different. And thank God also for the person, that one company that started this conversation that brought us here today. And thank you so much for sharing the story with me. So right now, I would like to, let's check the chat box for questions and comments regarding our conversation today. Let's check. Do we have questions or comments in the chat box? Let's check. Looks like we all got the gist of the conversation. I'm not okay. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have any questions. Does What takeaways do you have from this conversation? Okay, there's a comment in the in the chat box. Okay, Adedoja said, I enjoyed the storytelling. It was such a beautiful session. Thank you, Adedoja. So there's a question. Yes. So, Mr. Macroy, you please help us with this question. The question says, why has Nigeria not been able to utilize our oil revenues since its discovery? Countries like Qatar and Saudi done a lot with their oil revenues. So this person, wants to hear, Olufemi Adesina, yes.
The answer is in the question itself. If you look at it, it's our political will. It's our political will. When you talk about places like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and all of that, political will, as in the leaders see the future and they're like, okay, for us to grow, we need an economic base, and oil provides that base for us. So you put in place those laws, come up with regulations, policies that will protect this. This is this aspect we have, should I say, lost. We've lost it, like the political will. There's no, whatever you want to say, it boils down to the political will. How do we harness this potential in terms of resources, value, increase the value chain and all that you put? Political will. A place like Saudi Arabia, if you go, as in if you study their laws, if you sabotage the oil process, it's not a prison term thing, they kill you. It's not a prison term thing. No, they execute you because you are more or less you're a clog in the wheel of progress. It will affect the whole, and it drives fear, puts fear in the mind of whoever. So they have that kind of structure in place. But I think with what is happening today, maybe the younger generation will wake up to see that we need to hold ourselves accountable on this. I think Mr. Didion should have something to add to this. This question.
Oh yes, absolutely. So, like you said, the baseline is political will, but if I want to break it down and like expatiate on a bit of that, so we've got a resource issue, you could call it the resource curse, right? And just because of the sheer scale of revenue that comes in, it's unfortunately an open cesspool for corruption to take seat, right? And that is where you have, like, if there's deep-seated corruption, there's no political will to do the right things. You know what's going to happen, right? So we also unfortunately have quite some weak governance and institutions where when you talk about how oil revenue weakens the social contract between citizens and the state, right? When the government doesn't depend on taxes from its people, there's less incentive to be accountable, right? And you can see now that there are a few reforms coming in, taxes going higher. So I think there's that idea already around this and how to shift that and start getting into a space where the dynamics are changing. We've got an over-reliance on oil, let's be honest. We don't have as many, manufacturing base is not as strong. It comes, it goes. You see these companies, once upon a time, you would have, I remember in Port Harcourt, then there were these new NEW, and that did, there was Dunlop, but they come, they go, oil stands, because exactly. We had the paper mill in Akwa Ibom. A lot of those things they don't stand the test of time because the revenue or the account money they bring in is not as big, right, as oil money, right? And so that those sectors have been largely neglected. Of course, we know what that means in terms of GDP and inflation and how those interactions work against us. And then we've also got to think about scale, right? Population scale. We're a lot of humans here, right? In contrast to like, I think we're like maybe roughly 234 million or thereabouts. But you have places like Saudi Arabia at 38, Qatar 3 million. The per capita oil revenue in our country is much lower, and the wealth spread is also incredibly thin because of that. And then we've got infrastructure deficit. We've got a lot of infrastructure needs estimated at trillions of dollars to sort out. So decades of investment and etc. means that we are allocating our funds quite differently from how places like Qatar and Saudi Arabia are allocating their funds. And then we think about security. I mean, we keep on hearing about industrial oil theft. It means that we're actually not getting the full capacity of the revenue or income that we should be generating, because there are people out there that are vandalizing, that are stealing and draining the economy of what should have come into the economy, right? Yeah, and I think that's kind of like it. So those are kind of like my contributions onto why we are not utilizing our revenue in quite the same way or in its totality like other countries like Qatar and Saudi are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dijang, for shining that light. So when you were talking, you talked about mismanagement and, you know, maybe the government of the time not really working fully in the interest of the citizens. That's why Nigerians had to go through so much, I'll say, mental and emotional harassment in those years when it was just that you just find someone at your backyard, you know, trying to find oil without you knowing prior to that time. So thank you so much for giving those insights. Then we have another, I think this is a comment, I'll read it so that you can react. And I see TA reacting to this already in the chat box, but I would like you to react to this as well. Somebody says, that's Uluwafemi Adesina again. It says, in a time when the world is moving from oil to renewable energy, what roles do you see Nigeria playing, and how do we plan to move on from oil? Indeed, the Dutch disease is upon us already. In Nigeria, oil and gas has become a curse. I don't think so. Rather than nature's blessing to mankind. You do want to react?
Okay, you want me to react to it?
Yes, please.
On the aspect of renewable energies, I think we're getting it wrong. You know, I've had this discussion a lot more times with colleagues, friends in that space. There's a lot of rollback on this renewable energy in terms of investment. The big oil and gas firms, you know, global and all that, they're going back on pre-COVID, what they said and all that. They're going back to oil exploration, for your information. If you read the books, and a good number of them are coming back to Africa and all. So on the back of oil and gas, you know, when you look at it closely. The other day I was giving an example on when the digital age, we hear this outcry, AI this, AI that. And I asked the question, who and what powers AI? Have we sat down to think about it? Who and what powers AI? If you look at the infrastructure of AI, it rides on what? Rare earth metals. It goes back to what? Exploration. That's it, rare earth metals. So AI will be AI, or AI would not be AI without rare earth metals. And we see what is happening in the Congo. We see what is happening in some part of Africa. The big investors in that space have more or less taken over huge land spaces in Africa, in the bid of harnessing these rare earth metals for the functionality of AI and the global world. It is for me, I think it's just for us to sit down and ask ourselves those pertinent questions as a people, hold ourselves accountable. What do you want? Let's leave all the grammar we're speaking. This thing we have, how do you want us to use it for ourselves? Let's be selfish now, for ourselves. When we take care of ourselves, we have done that. We can now give out the value chain. That's what that's where I'm going. If you look at the story of America, they also were in this situation we find ourselves at a time. But again, they sat down, look at themselves in the eyes. The Rockefellers and the JP Morgans and what have you. Ask those questions. And it's like, this is what we want for us, America. And they built that, what I call it, narrative, the American dream and everything, tied all of their aspirations and future, whatever, into it. So as a people, Nigerians that we are, this is my opinion anyway, we need to hold ourselves accountable and ask ourselves, what do we do with this thing? It's not a curse, for your information. It's a blessing. But if you don't know the purpose of a thing, then abuse is inevitable. That was what a wise man said. So we need to go back. That's how I will answer these questions from a philosophical standpoint. Hold yourself accountable. All of us, hold yourself accountable. How do we make the best of this thing called crude oil or oil and gas? Because the earth runs on an energy profile. Everything on the earth revolves around energy. And how you deal with that energy would also show around the earth. I'll leave the other bit for Gideon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Makwe. Mr. Gideon, do you have anything to say? I'd like also to read TA's reactions, or if she could come up to share with us. Mr. Gideon, please, if you have reactions.
So
Yes.
specifically to the oil and gas is a curse sentence? Is that what you're asking about?
Yes, please.
So I also don't think that it's a curse. I think it's just around the mismanagement, and then just like personal interest, personal accountability. Then that's when you get mismanagement coming into the picture and people wanting to take advantage of it for their own personal gain. So 100% not a curse. Totally. We just need to understand. We need more I would say a lot more transparency in the system, because it is.
Oh, the network didn't want us to get. Oh, Mr. Gideon, your internet is a bit hazy.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much. TA, I don't know if you can speak to share your comments regarding this, or I go on to read your reactions already. So Miss TA says regarding the comment about the oil being a curse or not, she said oil and gas is not a curse. Yes, mismanaged, but then it's not a curse. Also, regarding talking about the renewable, moving from oil to renewables, just as Mr. Makwe says, TA says the first focus for the energy transition, that is the movement from oil to renewables, is for the energy transition. The first focus for the energy transition is first to provide reliable and affordable access to energy for the emerging nations. That's part of what Mr. Makwe says, that we need to look inwards. What do we want? What works best for us? Then the balance is in environmental responsibility, economic prosperity, and sustainable development. oil and gas can also be produced sustainably. Thank you, TA, for that reaction. So we have another comment plus question. Chisom Christiana says, thanks for this beautiful narrative. This has been very educative, enlightening, and professionally executed. Kudos to the organizers and moderators. Thank you. She said, you rightly mentioned repetition moving forward. How do we ensure that our leaders at the table of negotiation put the Nigerian people first rather than quick wins and personal gratifications? Who would want to answer that? Because I also think that those in the government positions can answer better, but then we can share.
Exactly. All right. Accountability. It's, we need to be courageous enough to hold our leaders accountable. A lot of us Nigerians, a good number of us, we don't hold our leaders accountable. I'm not out of the equation now. You know, we have built this mindset in this part of the world as Nigerians. We're very resilient people. I give it to us. But we always leave what we have to do and we say, God day. Ego better. No. Even scripture, I'm a Christian. I mean, he said, faith without works is dead. We need to come up with that framework, hold our leaders accountable. Somebody may tell you that they won't respond to you and all that. No, we don't import them. They come from amongst us. They come from amongst us. And if we don't come up with a framework of holding them accountable, well, it will be business as usual. But come up with that framework as a people, be it a political pressure group and what have you. And you're speaking not from a selfish standpoint now, you're speaking from that point, because everything we're doing here now, just like we read through the stories and all that, it's like a virtuous cycle. We're just going round and round. It's like it's repeating itself again. What happened in 1903 through 1936 through 1956 through what have you. It's like we're going through it again. So it's a question you ask yourself, excuse me, don't you think it's high time we hold ourselves, because our leaders come from amongst us, we hold ourselves responsible, accountable. How do we do that? What do you call accountability? For crying out loud, somebody comes out and brandishes a certain kind of wealth, and we all are praising the person, and nobody's asking, where did you get it from? How did you come about this wealth? How, as in, how did you come about it? So what do you now see? The younger generations begin to imbibe the culture of praising the wrong, accepting that as a norm, and it plays out. So just to let us not to overflog the issue, hold our leaders accountable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Amakri, for that, for your thoughts. So let's go back to the chat box. TA says strong educational awareness for public knowledge is a strong tool for driving democratized change. Leaders at the table must be equipped with their partner options. We have another comment in the comment section. Aisha says, this is not only a program, but a means of promoting and enlightening our knowledge. Thank you so much, our speakers, audience, more especially our organizers. May God continue to bless you. Amen. Thank you so, so much. At this point, I would like to call on TA to give our appreciation and our comments for this session before we begin to call it a wrap. I don't know if TA is available to speak.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. I hope I don't have an echo.
No, you
Okay,
don't.
great. Right. Thank you very much, Amatri Didi. It's been a pleasure listening to you. More importantly, the knowledge that you both brought to this conversation. In reflection, before I get into thanking you, really, when you mentioned the word repetition, I think it also comes with a lot of opportunity. The fact that history is repeating itself means that we have a unique advantage to understand history and learn from what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do differently with the new sets of tools available to us. One of the sets of tools available to us is technology. It's improved human relationship through democracy. So now we can't gun down people. We can't, just walk into our communities and say, we are taking the sacred and there's nothing anybody can do about it. We do not have colonial masters. We understand that finance is a game changer because that's what killed the early explorer, because they didn't have the financial will, even though they had better intentions, but they were lacking in strong financial will. So this knowledge is really to help us chart the future better. And I like to cite, coincidentally, the example of a country that I'm currently in right now, and that's Brazil. Brazil moved from a 200K barrel of oil production in the worst terrain in terms of geology, in terms of access, and today they are doing over 5 million. They set target to do even much more by 2030, producing sustainably and lifting people out of poverty. This is what oil and gas is on earth to do, is to lift people out of poverty, is to provide opportunities, is to also help us to move to the next phase of transition. And that's the story that we told today of how uniquely human voices, human decision, collective power, political will can drive a national agenda with or without people's will. People's will, while important, starts with education. There is no amount of coercion, power, abuse, or even strong forces that can make people who lack knowledge to go in the right direction. So thank you for putting this story up, shared in a way that is relatable, and especially the conversationalist path where both of you exchange the ideas even better. Really, really appreciate this rendition. I do hope that our audience take away learnings, not only history, because history is good for history. The learnings of history is good for the future. So I hope that we have done something to the mind of our audience, which is to challenge the gap in that history that we all knew, and with the expectation that, oh, Shell Darcy was the first company that came into Nigeria. No, it started with humans like you and I, explorers who had studied the world through knowledge, geology, archaeology, all sort of subjects, even psychology, pioneering, looking for wasteland, looking for, they were the humans in them came with a creative spirit. And that's what we want to give you today. Your creativity counts for something. Your knowledge, your desire, your purpose counts for something. In the energy industry, what we have today is a lot of workers who follow processes and who, because of organizational constraints, are lacking of their pioneering and their exploratory efforts. I hope this storytelling challenges you to start thinking differently at your workplace, at what you bring to the table, and how we can help our nation rise out of poverty, utilizing oil and gas. So thank you, Makri. Thank you, Didi. Thank you, Remy, Grace, and everyone who joined us on this call. Thank you for joining us. And happy Independence Day to Nigeria.
Thank you so much, TA. Thank you, everyone who joined this conversation. And again, congratulations to Nigeria. God brought us so much far from where we started from. And the history of oil and gas, you know, the story from what it started from and where we are today, we have come a very, very long way. And we are grateful to God for that and for the beginning of a new year for our nation. Thank you, TA, for that beautiful remark. And I want to thank our teller for today and the conversant as well. Mr. Makuri, thank you for shining the light, for lighting the torch that